Jax's revenge domain. He destroyed our FDA 510 kilo files on a company Livestream and called them bureaucratic garbage. Those files were the only thing standing between his father's startup and a federal shutdown. I watched it happen from my office 40 feet down the hall, the Livestream feed showing Dylan Ashford standing in our main conference room like he was about to revolutionize the medical device industry instead of torpedo it. My name is Wesley Thompson. I'm 48 years old, and I spent 12 years in the Air Force as a biomedical equipment specialist before joining TechMed Solutions 8 years ago as their FDA compliance officer. I've seen a lot of things go wrong in my time, but nothing quite like this. They'd wheeled in an industrial paper shredder, the kind you'd use for classified documents, not regulatory submissions. Dylan wanted theater. He wanted to make a statement to all 85 employees watching across our two buildings. Some were at their desks with headphones on, others crowded into break rooms staring at wall-mounted screens. A few stood right there in the conference room, arms folded, faces blank. Dylan held up a thick binder, white 3-inch spine with color-coded tabs I'd organized myself over the past 6 months. He read the label out loud. FDA 510, Key Pre-Market Notification, CardioGuard Pacemaker System, Revision 12. He waved it around like a prop, then he fed it into the shredder. The machine screamed. 85 people heard it. This, Dylan said, gesturing at the table behind him stacked with manila folders and submission documents spanning 3 years of FDA work. This is the Department of No. Today, the Department of No is permanently closed. About half the room clapped. The other half just stared. The ones who stayed quiet were the engineers, the ones who knew what those binders actually meant. I closed my laptop at 2:30 p.m., not because I was upset, but because I'd seen enough. I opened my secure drive and copied the entire Livestream recording. Video file, metadata, timestamps, employee distribution log. Then I copied it again to a backup drive. This wasn't paranoia, this was protocol. The Air Force taught me that documentation keeps people alive. When you're dealing with medical devices, a missing inspection report can kill someone's father. A destroyed compliance file can shut down production of devices that people depend on to live. The CardioGuard pacemaker in those destroyed files? That exact model had kept my wife Linda alive for 4 extra years before the cancer finally took her. At 3:15 p.m., Dylan walked into my office. He brought Sandra Miles from HR with him. She held a tablet against her chest and wouldn't make eye contact. She positioned herself slightly behind Dylan, like someone watching a bomb disposal go wrong. Dylan sat down without being invited. He adjusted his Apple Watch and smoothed his $200 haircut. 29 years old, Stanford MBA, spent the last 18 months bouncing between departments because his performance reviews were consistently mediocre. His father, Gerald, had created the title Chief Innovation Officer for him 6 months ago. "Wesley, we're restructuring the regulatory function," he said. "Your role is being reimagined," he said, reimagined like he'd been practicing it in the mirror. I looked at him sitting across from my desk. Perfect teeth, designer glasses, the kind of confidence that comes from never having real consequences for your mistakes. "I see," I said. Dylan leaned forward. His eyes moved slightly left, accessing a prepared speech instead of actual thought. The compliance function has become a friction point in our innovation cycle. We need agile methodologies, not bureaucratic gatekeeping. I'm bringing in a digital transformation consultant to rebuild our regulatory architecture from the ground up. Fresh perspective, modern approach. The board wants velocity, Wesley, not binders. The board hadn't been consulted. I knew this because Gerald's general counsel, Patricia Ward, would have warned me. Patricia had sent Gerald 2 written memos about giving Dylan operational authority. Gerald had ignored both. Sandra tapped something on her tablet. Still wouldn't look at me. "Your severance package is 12 weeks, Dylan continued. "Standard separation agreement with non-disparagement language. We think that's generous given the circumstances." He slid a folder across my desk. I didn't open it. I took my legal pad and my tactical pen, a cross-century 2 that Linda had given me when I'd gotten my FDA certification 8 years ago, and put it in my shirt pocket. I signed the paperwork. The non-disparagement clause wouldn't cover federally protected whistleblower disclosures, but Dylan wouldn't know that. Dylan didn't read legal documents. Dylan reimagined things. I packed what mattered into a cardboard box. The legal pad, 2 framed photos, one of Linda, one of our son Jordan at his high school graduation. The tactical pen was already in my pocket. I walked out of TechMed Solutions at 4:30 p.m. on a Wednesday in March, 8 years after I'd walked in. If you've ever been fired by someone who had no idea what they just broke, you know exactly how this feels. The parking garage smelled like concrete and motor oil. My truck was on the second level, a 2011 Ford F450 with 160,000 miles that runs just fine. I put the box on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel for a few minutes. I thought about Linda, not the gentle memories people offer condolences about. I thought about the specific week 5 years ago when her arrhythmia got so bad the doctors weren't sure medication would work anymore. That was the same week TechMed had our biggest FDA pre-submission meeting for the CardioGuard. I'd prepared for that meeting for 8 months. Every page, every data point, every response protocol, I stayed at work. I told myself the company needed me. I told myself we were building devices that would help other people like Linda. She understood. She always understood. That's what made it worse. The CardioGuard got approved 6 months later. Linda got her pacemaker implanted 2 weeks after that. It gave us 4 more years together. 4 years I might not have had if I'd walked away from that FDA meeting, but I'll never get that week back. The week she was scared and I chose spreadsheets over sitting next to her hospital bed. There was no mortgage payment to worry about. Linda and I had paid off the house 3 years before her diagnosis. Jordan was 19 now, sophomore pre-med at Duke, smart kid who looked exactly like his mother.
What I mean is, I wasn't financially trapped the way Dylan assumed I was.
Here's what Dylan didn't understand about those compliance files he'd just shredded on camera. The CardioGuard documents, the quality management protocols, the post-market surveillance reports. Those weren't just records of past inspections. They were active. They documented 8 known device deficiencies that we'd identified and were correcting through formal corrective and preventive action protocols. The FDA knew about these deficiencies because I'd disclosed them voluntarily and submitted remediation timelines with my signature on every cover letter. When Dylan fed those binders into that shredder and called them bureaucratic garbage, he didn't just destroy paper. He destroyed the only evidence that TechMed was actively fixing known problems with devices that were already implanted in patients. Under FDA regulations that converts manageable compliance issues into willful concealment of safety violations. And he did it on camera, with timestamps, with metadata, in front of 85 employees on a recording I'd already copied before walking out of the building. I sat in that truck for 15 minutes, then drove home. Jordan was at his study group. The house was quiet except for Max, our golden retriever, who met me at the door with his usual enthusiasm followed by that long look. That means he knows something's changed. I poured 3 fingers of Maker's Mark, not the daily stuff. The good bourbon, and sat at the kitchen table with my legal pad. I wrote down a phone number I'd memorized 6 years ago. At 6 p.m., I called Preston Clark. Preston picked up on the first ring. I could hear a basketball game in the background. Wednesday evening, which meant he was home in his recliner like every Wednesday for the past 6 years. "Wesley," he said. Not a question. Preston always knew when something was off. "They fired me today," I said. "Who's they?" "Gerald's son, the one with the made-up title." Ice clinked in a glass on his end. "The innovation officer, that's the one." Preston Clark, 51 years old. Partner at Clark & Associates, specializing in FDA regulatory law and whistleblower litigation. We'd served together at Edwards Air Force Base. He'd been a JAG officer while I ran the medical equipment maintenance program 2 floors below. We'd eaten lunch in the same base cafeteria for 3 years. When he left the Air Force, he went to Duke Law. When I left, I went to TechMed. We'd maintained a monthly call ever since. In 6 years, I'd never called him on an unscheduled Wednesday. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start with the shredder." I told him about the Livestream, the industrial shredder. Dylan reading off the CardioGuard submission like it was a joke. I told him about the phrase Department of No. I told him about the 8 active CAPA protocols that were in those binders, how every deficiency had been voluntarily disclosed to the FDA with formal timelines under my signature. Preston was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he did this on a company live stream, 85 employees across 2 buildings, timestamped, internally distributed. "And you have a copy, 2 copies, encrypted drives, downloaded before I left at 4:30. More silence. "Wesley, do you understand what he did legally?" "Yes, say it anyway." He destroyed active remediation documentation for known device deficiencies on a recorded company broadcast under 21 U.S.C. 360I and the False Claims Act. That's not poor records management. That's willful concealment of known safety violations. The fact that he fired you the same day establishes retaliation against the person responsible for maintaining those records. That's why I'm calling you at 6 p.m. instead of waiting for our monthly call. Preston laughed once through his nose. You know what the beautiful part is? You didn't have to build a case. They live-streamed it. We worked for 4 hours and 20 minutes. Preston walked me through the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations filing process step by step. I sat at my kitchen table with my legal pad and wrote every instruction in the same block print I'd used for equipment maintenance logs at Edwards Air Force Base. At 10:20 p.m., I submitted the formal whistleblower complaint to the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations. Electronically filed, time-stamped, documented. Then I closed my laptop, washed my bourbon glass, and let Max out into the backyard. The March air was cool, and the neighborhood was quiet. Jordan's light was off. He'd come home from his study group, eaten leftover pizza, and gone to bed without asking why I was home early or why I'd been on the phone for 4 hours. Smart kid, knew when not to ask questions. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up at 7:15 a.m. without an alarm. First time in 8 years. Jordan had already left for his early lab class. There was a note on the counter in his handwriting. Made coffee. Didn't know if you had work today. See you tonight. My phone buzzed at 8:45 a.m. Text from Amanda Foster, my former quality engineer. They hired a consultant from a software company to transition the regulatory function. His name is Brad. Brad asked what CAPA stands for during this morning's team meeting. I stared at that message for a long time. Amanda had worked under me for 3 years. She could have run regulatory compliance herself with some training. She knew every device, every submission, every FDA contact, but they didn't promote Amanda. They hired Brad. That same morning, Dylan posted on LinkedIn. Amanda sent me a screenshot at 9:30 a.m. The post was 280 words about organizational transformation, eliminating friction points, and sometimes leadership means making tough decisions to unlock innovation potential. It included a photo of Dylan standing next to the shredder, artfully composed with the machine slightly out of focus in the background. 92 likes by noon. 34 of them from TechMed employees. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't post anything anywhere. I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and drove to Jordan's campus to meet him for lunch. We ate at a sandwich shop near the engineering building. Jordan talked about his organic chemistry lab and whether he should take the MCAT this summer or wait until fall. Normal conversations. The kind I'd missed for 8 years because I was formatting FDA submissions for a company that had just replaced me with a man named Brad who didn't know what CAPA stood for. The days passed quietly. That was the point. Don't argue. Don't beg. Don't threaten. Just stop being the thing that was holding it all together and let gravity do the work. Day 3. Amanda texted that Brad had asked the manufacturing team to streamline the quality processes and eliminate redundant documentation. Day 5, another text. A cardiac surgeon from Duke called asking about post-market surveillance data for a CardioGuard patient. Brad told him he'd circle back after getting up to speed on legacy files. You don't tell a cardiac surgeon you'll circle back about a patient's pacemaker. Day 7, Amanda called instead of texting. Her voice was flat, controlled. The FDA reviewer for our annual post-market surveillance submission called the office today. Dr. Martinez, you've been handling his calls personally for 3 years. Who took the call, Brad? He told Dr. Martinez he'd need to onboard the regulatory portfolio and asked if they could reschedule for next month. I closed my eyes. You don't ask an FDA reviewer to reschedule a routine surveillance follow-up because you haven't read the files. That's not how it works. When an FDA reviewer calls your office, the correct response is immediate, complete, and documented. What did Dr. Martinez say? He didn't take notes. Day 11. Tuesday morning, 9:20 a.m. 3 FDA investigators arrived unannounced at TechMed's manufacturing facility. They presented credentials in Form FDA 482 to the receptionist, who called security, who called the plant manager, who called Patricia Ward. Patricia called Gerald. Gerald called Dylan. Dylan, according to Amanda's emergency email at 9:35 a.m., responded with a Slack message to the operations channel. Routine inspection. Let regulatory handle it. There was no regulatory to handle it. Regulatory was sitting at his kitchen table in a paid-off house, drinking black coffee, watching his golden retriever sleep in a patch of sunlight. The inspection lasted 6 days. 6 days of FDA investigators walking production floors, pulling batch records, requesting documentation that no longer existed. 6 days of Brad standing in rooms with federal regulators, unable to produce a single CAPA protocol, a single remediation timeline, a single post-market surveillance report. 12 critical violations documented across both production lines. Deficiencies that had been known, disclosed, and under active correction. Correction protocols that existed only in binders that were now confetti in a dumpster behind Building A. Amanda kept me updated through carefully worded texts. Day 12. Brad tried to explain our quality management system using a PowerPoint template he found online. Day 14. Lead investigator asked for you specifically. Brad said you were no longer part of the organizational structure. Day 16. They're requesting executive interviews. Gerald locked himself in his office. The warning letter arrived on day 25. Formal final addressed to Gerald Ashford as CEO. Manufacturing operations halted immediately. Both production lines shut down. The devices that generated $47 million in annual revenue stopped being manufactured on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate because Tuesdays had become the day things ended at TechMed. The stock price wasn't public. TechMed was still private, but the investor panic was immediate. Amanda's final official text came at 3:47 p.m. Emergency all-hands meeting at 400. Gerald looks like he aged 10 years overnight. Dylan was not invited. On day 26, at 7:15 a.m., my phone rang. I was making coffee. Max was eating his breakfast. The caller ID said Gerald Ashford. I watched it ring 4, 5, 6 times. Then silence. The voicemail was 47 seconds long. I listened to it twice. Gerald's voice was steady but tired. Wesley, it's Gerald. I know you're probably not interested in talking to me right now, and I understand that, but we need your help. The FDA is requiring a complete remediation plan within 30 days, and Patricia tells me you're the only person who understands our submission history well enough to rebuild what we lost. I'm prepared to offer you Chief Regulatory Officer, full authority over the FDA response, and whatever compensation package you think is fair. Please call me back. I deleted the message without saving it. At 9 a.m., I called Preston Clark. Gerald called, I said. Of course he did. His production lines are dark. His investors are panicking. His general counsel is probably polishing her resume. What did he say? I didn't answer. Preston was quiet for a beat. Good. Don't call him back. Not until I tell you to. 3 days later, the board convened what Patricia would later describe as the longest 45 minutes of Gerald's professional life. Gerald sat at the head of the conference table where he'd sat for 9 years, since founding TechMed in his garage with 2 other engineers. The boardroom overlooked the research triangle. Same view Gerald had watched while building the company from 3 employees to 85. Now, those 85 employees were facing layoffs because his son had shredded federal compliance documents on a live stream. Patricia called me that evening with the details. The board had reviewed the FDA warning letter line by line. They'd examined the destroyed documentation list. They'd calculated the cost of rebuilding compliance from scratch. 18 months minimum, $3.2 million in consulting fees. No guarantee the FDA would accept the remediation plan. Then they'd looked at Dylan's LinkedIn post, the photo of him standing next to the shredder, smiling. The board called the vote, removal of Gerald Ashford as CEO, effective immediately. Not because Gerald had destroyed the files, but because he'd given his son authority over systems he didn't understand. When Patricia had warned him twice in writing about Dylan's decision-making, Gerald had ignored both memos. Gerald voted for his own removal. 6-0, unanimous. Dylan was terminated the same afternoon. Security walked him out. The same security team that had escorted me out 29 days earlier. 2 weeks later, the shareholder lawsuit was filed, $18 million, naming Dylan personally for willful destruction of regulatory assets and gross negligence in fiduciary duty. The livestream recording was Exhibit A, timestamped, distributed to 85 witnesses, uploaded to TechMed's internal server with permanent metadata. Preston called me that afternoon. It's time, he said. Apex Medical Systems wants to talk to you. How do you know Apex? Because they've been watching this situation unfold. Dr. Catherine Morrison, their CEO, used to work FDA device approval. She knows what good compliance looks like, and she knows what it costs to rebuild from nothing. The interview lasted 30 minutes. Dr. Morrison sat across from me with a printed copy of TechMed's FDA warning letter, public record, now, and asked one question. "Can you rebuild it?" "I've done it before," I said. She offered me the position that day. Chief Regulatory Officer, Apex Medical Systems. $875,000 annual salary, $2.8 million equity package vesting over 4 years. Full authority over all FDA relationships with written guarantee of independence from non-regulatory executives. I read every line of the contract. Preston reviewed it for 2 days. We changed one word in the non-compete clause. I signed on day 52. 6 months later, Apex acquired TechMed's intellectual property portfolio at bankruptcy auction for $6.8 million, patents I had helped secure through FDA submissions. Devices whose regulatory histories I knew by memory. Technology that was now sitting on my new desk, waiting for me to rebuild the documentation that would bring them back to market under a company that understood what compliance actually meant. The CardioGuard pacemaker design became Apex's flagship development project. We relaunched it 18 months later as the CardioGuard Pro with enhanced monitoring capabilities, cloud connectivity, and full FDA approval. The submission package I prepared was 847 pages. Every page documented, cross-referenced, and backed up in 3 separate systems. The approval letter arrived on a Wednesday. Dr. Morrison called me into her office to read it together. "Approved without conditions," she said. "Outstanding submission quality." The reviewer specifically noted the thoroughness of our post-market surveillance protocols. I thought about Linda. She would have liked knowing that her pacemaker design was helping other families avoid what we went through. Jordan graduated pre-med last month with a 3.8 GPA and acceptance to Duke Medical School. I was there for the ceremony. Front row, no work crisis, pulling me away. After graduation, we drove to the baseball field where he'd played Little League and threw a ball around for an hour, just because we could. That night, Jordan asked me something I wasn't expecting. "You seem different since you left TechMed, more present, like you're actually here when you're here." I thought about that for a while. "I learned something about priorities," I said finally. "Your mom always said I was good at fixing broken systems. I just needed to learn when to stop fixing them for people who didn't want them fixed." Jordan nodded. "She would have been proud of what you built at Apex. She would have been proud that I made it to your graduation." We drove home and I made dinner while he told me about his plans for medical school, his interest in cardiology, his hope to work on medical devices someday. Normal conversation, father and son talking about the future, the kind I'd been too busy for during 8 years of formatting FDA submissions for people who called my work bureaucratic garbage. Amanda Foster joined Apex 6 months after I did. She's now our Director of Quality Assurance, running the team that monitors CardioGuard Pro devices in the field. Brad, the software consultant, lasted 11 days at TechMed before being quietly released. Gerald sold his house and moved to a smaller place in Asheville. He's working as a part-time engineering consultant now. Dylan's lawsuit is still ongoing. His LinkedIn profile lists him as available for innovation consulting opportunities. The last post was 8 months ago. Sometimes justice doesn't announce itself with sirens and handcuffs. It arrives quietly in a federal filing submitted at 10:20 p.m. by a man at his kitchen table with a legal pad and a tactical pen. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the person who stops talking. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who doesn't understand what you built is simply to stop building it for them. Me? I'm sitting on my back deck with Max at my feet and a glass of Maker's Mark, watching my son study for his first year of medical school. The neighborhood is quiet. The stars are doing what they always do, whether anyone's watching or not. Tomorrow I'll go to work building systems that keep people alive for a company that understands what that means. If this story hit home for you, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments if you've ever dealt with someone who destroyed something important because they couldn't be bothered to understand what it was for. Sometimes the best revenge is just walking away and letting them figure out what they lost.